last week, which is really quite a dynamic one for us and quite a difficult one, because when we hear it in these very traditional Asian way, Tibetan and Indian, it sounds very odd for us, very difficult. So we try to talk about it. I can only talk about it in a very down-to-earth way, like we did last week, which is the necessity for a teacher. Then finding a teacher, how you find a teacher, how you choose, and then on the basis of that choice, how you then learn to practice on the, you get the best from that teacher, how you get the best from that relationship. That's the practical way of putting it. We talked about that last week. But I think also before that, we did talk about, when we just also talked about, okay, so from a teacher's point of view, okay, Tsongkhapa starts with, got to have a teacher. But even before that, Lama Zopa, I think I mentioned this too, even before that, you could say, Rinpoche, when he started teaching modern people like you and me, whose view is the mind is the brain, who have no other view. We either in our modern world either have the view that you've got a soul if you're religious, and if you're not religious, you have a brain. I mean, they're the two options, but the Buddha's got this third option, if you like, that we have a thing called consciousness or mind, but he would say it's not physical. So the crucial point, I think we discussed with this, we started with this point, and this is Lama Zopa's point when he began. If the end result of this long whole process we're discussing is to become a Buddha, then we've got to know what part of us becomes a Buddha. He doesn't talk about a soul. Our nose and our brain and our eyelashes and our feet and our body don't become a Buddha. Our mind becomes a Buddha. So it's pretty clear then, we need to start off knowing what the mind is. So we looked at the whole point, the fundamental points of the mind, the fundamental characteristics as far as Buddha is concerned. That mind is not physical. That it's got much subtler levels of cognition. That crucially, it's not the handiwork of someone else. This is the biggest shock, but a necessary one to try and understand, at least theoretically, that we're not the handiwork of a creator, and we're absolutely not the handiwork of our parents. They give us a body, there's no argument there, but they do not give us our mind. They do not give us our love and our kindness and our anger and our jealousy and our Buddha nature. They do not give us our capacity to play music or football. This is the biggest shock because it's just completely embedded, isn't it, in the entire materialist view, the neuroscientific and psychological views of the world that we are used to thinking about. So this is a big shock to us to think about this. But the whole of Buddhist teachings, the whole of Buddhist philosophy and psychology is based upon this view here, this view of the Buddhas coming from his own observation, that consciousness, there are trillions and trillions and trillions of consciousnesses, mind possesses. This is the Tibetan term, sem chen, for the word sentient being. There are trillions of them, and they're not made by a creator, and they're not coming out of nowhere, and they're not physical. And these sentient beings, the mind aspect of us, the body part's physical, of course it is. These go back and back and back and back and back. They're the product of the law of cause and effect, which is a radically different view from how we think in the modern world, and indeed from the Christian view. As far as the Christian view is concerned, God made you, and you start in your mummy's womb when he puts the soul there. There's no view like that in Buddhism. And if you're a materialist, you began then too, because mummy and daddy decided to create you. Not that view either. Your consciousness is not physical, and it's yours, and it comes from previous moments of your consciousness. And it goes back and back and back, because it can't have a first moment. One of the biggest misconceptions, the Buddha would say, one of the non-questions, it's a meaningless question. Where did I begin? Where did it begin? Where did the universe? Of course, things begin, and relatively speaking, things all have a moment when all the pieces came together, and a thermos started, or a light started, or a computer started, or this person called Robina, for sure. You could say that's happened at the moment of conception, when the egg and the sperm and the consciousness from before all joined together, and that's the beginning of Robina, and she pops out a few months later. But each of those components, the body and the mind, has its own continuity. So the Buddhist view very much is, that physical matter, they still talk in the very ancient terms of the matter being made of the four elements. Matter is also beginningless. As Dalai Lama said, paraphrasing, Big Bang, no problem, just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So mind goes back and back and back, and matter goes back and back and back. That's kind of embedded in this entire Buddhist view of cause and effect. So that's the position that he's stating. So we need to hypothesize that, because the rest of Buddhism doesn't fit if we don't put this point in. So we talk about the beginningless nature of mind, how it's a beginningless continuity of mental moments. It's not physical, doesn't come from a creator, doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't come from mummy and daddy. This is a major point. So then we looked at the necessity for a teacher, and then we take a teacher's point that we need, in order to even want to start to practice, to even enter into this path to enlightenment, we then have to do this market research and think about, look at the world and look at how fortunate we are. We understand how to do that. We compare, basically you do some comparison and you realize you're pretty fortunate. If we compare, we're like 1.0%, 1% of the universe, not rich, fortunate, got all our wits together, pretty much, reasonable conditions, a bed to lie on, a house to live in, food to eat, all these things that are necessary, which are the fruit of our past virtue, which we'll talk about when we get to karma, which then give us the miracle of leisure to do what? To want to practice a spiritual path, to develop this marvelous potential we've all got. That's the meaning of the so-called perfect human rebirth, And it's not given to us. We created it. We got it. It's a result of our own past work. And I think a good analogy here is, and we don't think of ourselves like this, this human life we've got, this human body, and the combination of this body with this mind of ours, basically it's a really incredible resource. And we don't think of ourselves as a resource. It sounds peculiar, We just have this big sense of big lump of me plodding through life, hoping for the best. But if we think think of our conditions and what we are actually, this body and this mind and the combination, this human life, it's a precious, extraordinary, rare resource. So what does that mean, Well, I just use the dumb analogy of money. If you've never heard of money, and and you've got all these small pieces of oblong paper with pretty pictures on it, and I think I've mentioned this before, it's like Swiss money is quite pretty. And they're very pretty pictures, nicely designed. But and this is such a simple concept, but you don't know the meaning of it. Money's not self-existent. It's like an example of emptiness. It's just a small piece of oblong, probably plastic. We've got plastic in Australia, probably plastic, I think in Swiss. Can't remember if it's plastic in Switzerland. But it's a piece of oblong, something with pretty pictures on it. But then suddenly, it's got numbers in the corner or wherever the numbers are. But this is a really crucial point. But if you don't know the meaning of money, if you don't know the meaning of it, then if you take it on face value, you see a small piece of paper, and it's very repetitive. There are many similar drawings on these different pieces of paper. Please hear me literally. And if you don't know the meaning, it's kind of boring. You take it on face value. It's too small to use for anything. Sometimes it's all crushed and dirty. You wouldn't even touch a dirty piece of paper on the ground if you saw it looking like that. But when you know the meaning of it, everything changes. You value it. And this is such a simple example. We value money because it's a resource. Because you give it to somebody and you can get something for it. Well, we are a resource. It's a surprise to think that we're a resource. We just think of it as a big lump of me, self-pity me, plodding through life. No, when we really realize that we're a precious resource. And what's this resource? A resource is something you can use to get something else. So what's this body and mind can be used for? Well, at the very least, we can live by go to junior school, abide by the laws of ethics, and not harm others, and guarantee that when we die, we'll get another decent human rebirth. That much we can do with this resource. Not only we can do that, we can go to the next level, high school, and start to become our own therapist and uproot the causes of suffering, uproot the delusions. Unbelievable, amazing, incredible. We can do that with this resource. Not only that, we can go to university and add bodhicitta to the mix and become a Buddha. We can do all that with this resource. Of course, it doesn't sound so exciting to us. It sounds very abstract and distant. Oh, yeah, sounds great. Please pass the sugar. Please pass the ice cream. So that's what we are. We're a resource. And that's what Atisha's getting at, wants us to think about it so we get some energy to conclude the action point. There's always an action point to each of these points in the Lam Rim. The action point here is don't waste this resource. You don't use money for toilet paper. You don't tip it in the bin. Even a €1, even a €5 note, €5, we're excited if we find one. Because we know why, because it's a resource. You can do something with it. It's a perfect attitude, So we discussed that. I think we did anyway. So then we think, now we're ready, all primed and ready. We know we've got this amazing nature, this potential with our mind. We want to find a teacher to help us do it. We've thought about this precious life. We're already gung-ho to enter into junior school, entry level, grade 1, and begin to practice, but still not yet. We still have to keep priming our minds. So the next thing our teacher gets us to think about, and I can't remember if we talked about death. Can Talia tell me, how many sessions have we had, Talia?
This is the third one.
What have we discussed death yet?
No.
We didn't. Okay, because I'm sorry, I forget. Okay, that's fine. So next point, we're all primed and ready. We're all gung-ho. We know our mind is beginningless. We know it's got this amazing potential to become a Buddha. I'm sure we talked about that. That's the point. I did discuss that, the meaning of the word Buddha. That's our goal. We know we need a teacher. And then we've thought about this precious human rebirth. So we're now really energized to not waste this life. And now we get to the first level of the practice where we now, basically the agenda is, Atisha's agenda here, Tsongkhapa's agenda, is we're going to talk about Buddha's extensive teachings on impermanence. This is one of Buddha's fundamental teachings. There's vast literature on this concept of impermanence. But Atisha, his approach to impermanent teachings here is not to tell us all about subtle impermanence, which is most fascinating, most interesting. He wants to get us right between the eyeballs. He wants us to increase our wake-up call, increase our sense of not wasting this life by recognizing impermanence in relation to death. These conditions that are precious will end at some point. So his agenda is to give us a wake-up call, to increase our wish. But at the same time, the explicit teaching is to listen to Buddha's explanation about how things exist impermanently. So what's he doing here? All these points, basically Buddha's presenting them as an argument with misconceptions deep in the bones of our being. So, we can see one of the deepest misconceptions in us, totally instinctive, is that we assume we grasp at things as unchanging. Now, this is not a complicated teaching. Everybody knows perfectly well that things break, computers die, lamps die, relationships end, and people die. But especially when it comes to people dying, and especially when it comes to me dying, we absolutely do not want to know about it. We live in total denial, So what's the disadvantage of this? See, this is the key point that goes throughout the entire Buddhist path. The entire Buddhist path is a presentation of Buddha's own direct experiential findings about how things exist. So we ought to ask ourselves, I wonder why Buddha is telling us how he thinks things exist. Why is he doing this? Well, obviously, his reason is because he says, I'm sorry, folks, you're living in la-la land in relation to how things exist. And that, sweetie pies, is why you suffer. That's his point. He's not telling us how things exist and he's saying, you got to believe me. He's not telling us that. He's giving us his own experiential findings about how things actually exist. And his extraordinarily fascinating point is that the agenda is to stop suffering and to get happiness. And he's saying why we suffer is because we're not in touch with how things exist. This is a really fascinating point. We would never think that. We would never think that we're suffering because we don't know mathematics. And then if you learn mathematics, you get happy. So to some degree, it is true because mathematics does work. And if you can't count, you're in trouble. But this is Buddha's fundamental point. It's very fascinating. So the very first level at which he's telling us things exist, which is fairly evident to anybody with half a brain, is guess what, folks? Things change. So all we've got to do, the contemplating of this point, is to help us recognize how we desperately believe that things won't, even though intellectually we know things change, we're living in denial of it because we can't stand the fact that things change. So the first thing Atisha gets, and this is really to give us the wake-up call, this life is precious, but I'm sorry, guys, there are 3 points Atisha gets you to think about, 3 points that Tsongkhapa talks about. This is the analysis we have to do to get the wake-up call. So the first one is that death is definite. And I mean, anybody, again, with half a brain, we know that with certainty. With certainty, we know ants and humans and dogs, whoever lives, living things, living beings and things die, We know that. So we've got to then argue with this view deep in our bones, as Lama Zopa calls it, when we're grasping at impermanent, when we're grasping at, we grasp at everything as permanent because we don't want them to stop when it's a good thing. We'll go into, when we understand attachment later in high school, in the middle scope, we'll understand why. But here, we've got to start arguing, getting ourselves to get the wake-up call. That first point is that I will definitely die. I will definitely die. Now we say those words, they're not complicated, and we will nod our head and we will agree. But where's the problem? The problem is deep in our bones, Buddha says, and as Lama Zopa puts it, we've got this primordial assumption called grasping at permanent me. So even though we know it's not true, it's deeply instinctive, and it's a function of ego grasping. It's a function of all of the root delusion, you know, because we can't stand the thought. We can't stand the thought of not being me. I mean, Lama Zopa in his detailed, we'll discuss this briefly in this little module today, in this marvelous book of Lama Zopa's that's published more recently, a new version of it. It's called How to Face Death Without Fear. And it's a handbook. It's like 400 something pages. 2/3 of it is all the different techniques, the mantras and the sutras and the this and the that and these practices and those practices, all the different like toolkit of practices that we can use to help people die. The whole book is framed in terms of helping your loved ones die. And obviously by doing that, you know how to die yourself. It's pretty clear, isn't it? And so as Lama Zopa says, when the time in our loved one's life that they need us most is at the time of death, actually during that scenario. So that's a bit surprising to us because we think, oh, well, they're nearly dead. They don't want my help now. On the contrary, as Lama Zopa says, the entire life is now over. The karma from that life is finished. So now you've got to help the person make sure that the right karmic seeds are triggered at the time of death. And it's very specific. It's not long before you stop breathing. That's the exact period when the karmic seeds are triggered that will determine your next life. And that's when you need it most. And when we go into the teachings about karma, we'll understand that in more detail. Of course, we have to discuss it here because it's death. But there's two approaches to then being ready for death. And the approach here of Atisha, and therefore Tsongkhapa, is to change the way we live our life, to learn to live our life within the framework of the reality of impermanence. So let's look at how right now, because we are grasping at permanent me, how that messes us up, you know, and how then that when we do die, it's a complete shock to us and we've wasted our lives, you know. So we've got to try and get the realization that the first point is death is definite. Well, how do you get to do that? Well, in a teacher lists all these points, but then we can do it formally in meditation. But let's just talk about it in a natural, casual way. How you apply this view to your daily life, you know? I mean, we're confronted with the entire world every day through all our different media, you know, the social media, the newspapers, the magazines, the iPad, your iPhone. I mean, television, we're just bombarded day and night. So one of the things that's really evident is that people die. It always seems to be, for whatever reason, the most shocking thing to us. The worst piece of news is when people die. It always takes them central place in all the news, doesn't it? When people die. So, and it's always a shock to us. So even if just beginning to recognize how our delusion is there, the misconception that somehow things are permanent is attacked every time we see that someone dies. So in general, people die, but it doesn't touch us very much. So then the first point to contemplate is that, well, that person, there it is, it's the proof right there, that person who came into being, they're dead. That ant died. Look at that ant on the ground. You see an ant dead, and we say, oh, that's an ant dead, you know? Death is definite. It died. Whatever comes into the logic of impermanence is that whatever comes into being will end. And this is taught extensively in all the teachings. The nature of impermanent phenomena is they change from second to second. One of the characteristics of an impermanent phenomenon is it's constantly changing from second to second. But the grosser, and that's a subtle level, but the grosser level, we all know with impermanent phenomena, the nature of the universe, over billions of years, things come into being and then they disappear. That's the nature of impermanence. It's the nature of impermanence. But look how we think about ourselves, you know. It's very fascinating. We can't stand in the mirror. We can't stand seeing the evidence of getting older. I mean, look at us, all of us, everybody's the same. We can't stand the evidence of getting older because we have a very concrete view of me. Like if you didn't look in a mirror from the time you're 10 until you're 60, you'd have a heart attack if you saw a mirror for the first time. You'd have a heart attack if you'd seen yourself last when you were 10. You wouldn't think who's a stranger there, because we grasp at a certain view of ourselves, because we can't stand the point of change, because we can't stand the thought, most of all, of not being me, of dying, you know. So, but just learning to look at the world freshly, seeing people who die, seeing the people who die, the ants who die, the dogs who die, the sentient beings who die. So how do we see it now? Well, we see it through the lenses of attachment and anger. Now, if it's our beloved who dies, if it's our beloved pet who dies, it's the pain is unbelievable. If our beloved dies, it's a really painful experience. But we're not getting the right teaching. The teaching here is to recognize death is definite, and then the real wake up call, the time when it'll begin to be a teaching for you, is this will happen to me. That's when it becomes a wake up call. We see people die. You know, we might not care if they're strangers. That gets closer to home. We see our beloveds die and we have broken hearted. We experience all this grief. That's fine, but we don't get the learning. We don't get the real learning. The learning is that will happen to me. That's when we begin to learn. That's when we get the wake up call. So someone's just written to me recently and saying their mother just died, and they got really shocked and they suddenly realized that impermanence is true. So they're almost having panic attacks now about their own death. I mean, that's a good sign. Most of us, our mummy dies. We never occur to us to think that'll be me. In fact, if we analyze our minds, this is so interesting. Lama Zopa says we divide the whole world into living people and dying people. We don't think of it that way, but it's absolutely what we do. We divide the whole world into living people and dying people. And of course, we have the hubris of assuming, even if we're 97, we've got a bit more awareness, but even if we're old, we still have this hubris, this arrogance, this, you know, of I'm in the living person category. And what defines you as a living person? Well, either you're young, that's for sure, or you're fit, you're healthy. Even if you're old, you pride yourself on having fitness. You know, oh, I'm not sick, I've got a good heart, my bones are great. They say that the bones of a 40-year-old, and we're very proud of it. So we assume that somehow we're not dying. We're in the living category. This is just assumed. We don't go around talking like that. Now, then look, but it's true, because look how we think about people who suddenly we've discovered they're called dying. They've gone from the living category into the dying category. We can't even talk about them. We don't even want to look at them. We don't want to have a discussion with them. We talk to them in hushed tones. Oh, how are you, Auntie? We suddenly can't even see a person now because they're dying. It's too shocking for us. It's shocking for us. And why it's shocking is because we grasp at things as permanent, and it's just it's too threatening to us, because it's reminding us of what we could be, although we can't bear to think about it. So we have this incredible hubris. I'm a living person. I mean, as Lama Zopa says, it's completely absurd. Living people die before dying people every day. So all we're doing is pointing out our misconceptions, but they're very deep inside us. They're like assumptions. We have to counteract those assumptions. It's a joke to think I'm a living person, what Lama Zopa says. This is fact. It's not being smart, you know. Yes, because impermanence is what defines us. Impermanence is what defines us. This is very hard to hear, because we're so caught up in the bubble of permanent me now. And the whole of our life is like that, you know. Everything seems permanent. Your house seems permanent. You know, not only does your house seem solid, but when you're at work and you're going to, on the way home, there's an absolute assumption, isn't there, that your house will be there, that your husband will be there, that the children will be there. So this is this instinctive, primordial believing in things as not changing. And then we think, you mean I'm supposed to think my house might fall down? Am I supposed to think my husband will leave me? No, not in that hysterical way, but it is a fact that one day it will happen. You'll either die first or he'll die first. Fact. It's a fact. But we can't stand these facts because we don't know how to think about them. It sounds depressing to us. I always use the example of Nicole Kidman, whom I love, but I'm always quoting this story years ago, which is with Tom Cruise. And I read an interview with her. And she said at the end of the interview, and it was so powerful, and this is how we all think, we will be together until we're 80, she said. So where's that coming from? Let's analyze it. This is the point. Obviously, the relationship was delicious. They had a house, they had a family, you have a life, you have this bubble. We all have this. Look at our lives now. We have even as a small life, even as a bit depressing life, it's a little bubble that we live in, and it's our life. It's my furniture, my house, my beloved, my dog, my cat. This is how we are. So we're discussing precisely here the way grasping at things as permanent plays out in our lives, you know? So then what it causes is a deep assumption that we do not question that Tom will be there. And not only that, but he'll be there till we're 80. So why do we think that? Analyze. Why do we think that? Well, because we know things are impermanent. If she reads the newspapers every day, like the rest of us, she reads about people leaving each other. She reads about husbands dying. She reads about husbands leaving people. We know it. But because this is where we have to look at attachment, which we'll talk about later, because we have such fierce attachment to that bubble. This is just completely natural, spontaneous, deeply in our bones. There's such a fierce attachment that our happiness relies upon that husband, that house, that bubble, that we then impose this lie upon it that it will not change. We will be together until we're 80. This is the commonest experience we have. So basically, because at the moment it is delicious, because at the moment my body is healthy, I am feeling fit, I am feeling good. Because of that, then we put this extra thing onto it. Therefore, it will be like that tomorrow and the next day. We don't see it as a progressive, gradual thing. We don't see the impermanence, the changingness of it. We can't see it. We don't see the changingness of the house, the relationship. Because we can't bear to. So we set it in stone. We know we do this. So then, of course, very interestingly, in the article, I remember this so vividly, the next sentence she said was, and of course, if we won't be, that is to say, together till we're 80, I will be devastated. So at least she acknowledged the possibility that it could change. And naturally, of course, when the husband leaves you, when the house burns down, when you get cancer, we are devastated. And then we have to analyze that. Why are we devastated? We just assume it's natural. It's the devastation is the horror and the shock that your expectation didn't get what it wanted. That what you believed was true has proven to be not true. That's why we suffer. That's why it's so shocking. So Buddha's basically telling us, and this is the beginning here, particularly in relation to my own death, that it's an amazing way to transform your life. All the lamas say, when we start to realize the reality of impermanence, it completely transforms our life. In other words, I always think of a simple example, a really dumb example, but it's so clear. If you go away on a holiday, even for a weekend, you go to this gorgeous resort, a lovely hotel, the beach is there, the restaurant, it's just it's delicious, Now, this is what the interesting point is. First of all, if we think, you mean I'm supposed to think that Tom should leave me tomorrow? You mean I'm supposed to think that my children could die? Because then when we say, well, that just sounds completely nihilistic, that if it's possible that Tom could leave me, if it's possible we won't be together until I'm 80, if it's possible my house could break down, then what's the point of living? I might as well just die now, because we have such a view of permanence, we can't bear even to think about an alternative, and we don't know how to deal with it. But my point is about going away for the vacation, for the holiday, for a weekend. We understand exactly this. So you know perfectly well that delicious holiday is only for 2 days. Now, can you imagine going to that hotel and you become so attached to it that you completely forget that you've got to leave in 2 days, and you suddenly act like it's permanent and it's my hotel and this is going to last forever? We know we don't do that. We know it's impermanent. But listen to my point. Because we know you've only got 2 days, look at the viewpoint you have. You will not want to waste that holiday. You don't just get up in the morning after coming there from, Friday night, paying, whatever it is for the weekend. You pay all this fancy euros for this gorgeous hotel. And then let's say in the morning on Saturday, you wake up and forget that it's impermanent. You forget you've only got 2 days, and you're lying in bed going, oh, I can't be bothered. I'll go tomorrow. I'll go to the beach tomorrow. I'll go to the restaurant tomorrow. I'll go back to sleep now. You wouldn't do that, because you don't want to waste this precious opportunity. That's the analogy of using this life. When you realize that what you've got is precious, then you realize that it will end at any moment. And this is the first one, it'll end in general. Then you don't want to waste it. That's the conclusion. I remember one woman in one class, panicking because she thought her biggest fear that her husband would die. She thought of it all the time. And she said, please, Karen, how to help me live in the moment. I said, forget about living in the moment. Just accept the fact and say to yourself, well, honey, he will die. Yes, my husband will die. Confront the fact that he will die. And then how do you act? Then you treasure every moment. Just like that 2-day holiday. You don't waste it. It's just an analogy. You don't go back to sleep in your bed. You can do that at home. You don't waste that precious resource. You don't waste that precious opportunity, that vacation. You know it's impermanent. And my point is, when you realize your husband could die or could leave you, or your house could break down, or you could get cancer, it's not in the front of your mind. When it becomes a realization, it's just assumed. Your whole view of life changes. Suddenly, everything is changing, is impermanent, and you don't want to waste it. That's the learning from it. You don't want to waste it. It's very intelligent. So therefore, why would what's the point of having a fight with somebody? What's the point of being angry? Because you're holding on to all this misery and this anger. What's the point of grasping at all your money? What's the point of grasping at your reputation? What's the point of grasping at the house? You realize it's so foolish because it's going to change. So you become much more light. But you get the best of both worlds. You don't get depressed. You utilize your house while you've got it. You utilize your beloved husband while you've got him. You utilize these resources and do practice every day while you've got it. So it's actually an intelligent attitude that comes, not depression. Which is we're already depressed because we're trying to hold on to something that can't be held on to, which is the suffering of grasping at something as permanent, because it isn't permanent. That's the conflict. So it takes time, though. This is so embedded in us, this misconception that I'm permanent, Now, the next step of the three points, the next one should scare the life out of us. It's that death might be definite, but my goodness, the time of death is not definite. Again, this is absolute fact. All you have to do is do some research. We don't like this kind of research. So what research is this? You check up. Fetuses, babies die, but I think even you look at the evidence, if we did our research, I would think we would find that more beings who win the lottery and get a human womb due to their past virtuous karma, get born into a human womb, die before they're even born. That is to say, abortions and miscarriages. I wouldn't be surprised, but we never do that research. So even you get a human body, but you die even before you're born. It's a complete farce to think that, you die when you're old. Yeah, some people do. I think if you look at the numbers, not sure. Fetuses die, babies die, 2-year-olds die, healthy people die, happy people die. These are facts, but we keep thinking they're a mistake. So we want to hide them under the carpet. We don't like it, because we don't understand karma. This is the point. We're confused if a young, healthy person dies. That blows our mind. It's like an accident, It shouldn't have happened. We put it in the medical terms, we put it in the too hard basket. We just don't know why. Well, Buddha factors in karma. You've got a certain amount of karma in your petrol tank, and we'll discuss this later. Then that's how long you do it. That's how long you last, So the time of death is definitely uncertain. So that's like going on a vacation and you don't know how long you can stay. I always remember using this as a stupid example, but it's a good one. Years and years ago, I remember I'd often go off and I'd do what I call editing retreats. So when I was living in Northern California, with all these big redwood trees, people love the redwood trees, but when it gets to the winter, it's so wet and dingy and dark, I couldn't stand it, So I wanted to go to the sky, with some sky, and I'd do some editing. So some friends in Puerto Rico, which is a gorgeous little island in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of winter, it was just divine, And I had a little resort. Somebody offered me this little resort for I had 9 weeks to do this editing retreat. So as I was in an ordinary conventional sense, I was so looking forward. It was so exciting, the beach every day. So I go to the beach every day. I just could see the beach down outside my window. So I do my editing every day, and I go for a swim every day, and I go to the different restaurants every day, and I go for a walk every day. It was really delicious. But my point is this, it's like I knew it was impermanent. It was vivid to me. And this is the thing about the holiday. We're conscious every day goes by, 1 day less of holiday. And I look at my calendar, 1 day less, and now 8 weeks, and then 7 weeks. And of course, it's so delicious. You don't want it to end, but you know it will end. Because I was going to have to then fly to Boston, where it was 10 degrees below, So I love this little Puerto Rico. So because I realized it was impermanent, I didn't waste it. And I'm talking just conventionally in samsara here. Didn't waste what I had there, because I was vividly aware that it was impermanent. Now, can you imagine how ridiculous I would have been, just like that vacation, the 2-day holiday, that I'd forgotten it was impermanent, that I decided this is my apartment and my resort and my this. Look at when you see things as permanent, you start to get more angry. You'd sue the guy next door because he's making a loud noise, you know, and things are breaking and it's my thing breaking. But if you realize things are impermanent, you're much more relaxed and easygoing about it because you know that's the nature of things. So you make the most of what you have got and not cling to the things you can't change. It's much more skillful and wise, you know. So imagine after 9 weeks, and I'd completely forgotten that it was not my place and I had to go. And then Rita, I remember this lady, Rita was the kind of the landlord, this big resort. She'd come along and she'd have to drag me out screaming, Robina, I'm sorry, it's time to go. So this is also the simplest analogy for the third point. It's such a dumb example, but it's so practical. Is that when I did have to leave, I wasn't ready. If I believe that this is going to last forever, then when I did have to leave that apartment, I wasn't ready. I had nowhere to go. I hadn't planned my future. I didn't have an air ticket. I didn't do anything. And so she throws me out and puts me on the steps and I'm sobbing with self-pity because I wasn't ready for the next step. So this sounds hilarious. That means ready for the next life, you know. So the second one still is really should be scary for us. This is really pointing to how deeply instinctive grasping at permanence is. We know intellectually we're getting older. I know exactly what my age is. And I know based on the records of the world, it's likely I'll be dead. And, you know, if I'm fortunate, I might live till I'm 90 something, but you know, there's no guarantee. So that I definitely know that. But still, look how when we, it's sort of like we feel. We know the words, but we feel. Because why? Because there's deep delusion, deep in our bones, just instinctively from practicing it from countless lives, Buddha says, somehow I'm permanent. I'm not, meaning not changing. So it's a bit like, you know, like when you go somewhere and you know you've got to go shopping and it's 1 kilometer. You're familiar with the journey. You get into the car and we have this vivid experience, don't we? This vivid feeling as you drive out the gate. Already you're 10 meters from the front door. Then you move forward. You're 200 meters away from the door, moving towards the shop. It's a vivid feeling of moving towards something, further away from the house towards the shop. You're anticipating the shop. It's there, and finally you stand and you park next to the shop. It's a vivid feeling of moving towards something. We all have that. Even if the journey, like when I used to fly from Melbourne to Sydney, Melbourne to London, it was 24 hours, you know. You have a vivid feeling, 1 hour gone, 2 hours, 22 hours closer to London, 21 hours closer to London. We anticipate, we feel this movement forward. That's how we should live our life, but we don't. It's like every day you get into the car and the shops keep moving forward. You never get there. So we kind of vaguely know death is coming, but we don't really have a feeling for it at all. We wake up in the morning and feel about today exactly the same as we felt when I was 10. You live a life, it's like very static. And you wake up the next morning, the same old me getting out of bed. No, you're getting one day closer to death. This sounds hilarious to us, but it's a scientific fact. It's not meant to make us depressed. It's to give us the wake-up call. And the wake-up call. We're not at the wake-up call yet. That's the third point. These are things we understand, you know. So the third point, which is the conclusion, the action. At the time of death, which is this very precise moment, excuse me, I have to blow my nose, I'm sorry, excuse me. So at the time of death, the Buddha's view, of course, I'll do a series of givens here. Given that our mind is beginningless and endless, this is our proposition here. Given, and this is karma coming later, that every millisecond of what I think and do and say programs my mind, sows seeds in my mind. that will ripen in as my future, the person I become, given the next level of detail that every negative seed I plant will ripen as my suffering, and every positive seed I plant will ripen as my happiness. And finally, given logically I do want happiness and don't want suffering, then it follows logically that at the time of death, that moment when the consciousness, well, first of all, the first moment before you stop breathing, when the karmic seed that will determine your next life is triggered, that for that condition to be appropriate, for that condition to be all ready, in order for a positive seed to be triggered, you need to have a mind that's virtuous. You need to be ready for death. You need to have thought about death throughout your life, so that's what makes you ready. So then you'll die with a happy mind. Then a virtuous karmic seed will be triggered, and then you're programmed for a future life, a future good life. So given all that, the only thing that's useful to me at the time of death, the only thing that's useful to me at the time of death is my mind. That's it. And not even my mind, but my positive states of mind. My body is not useful. My husband, my beloveds, my children, my money, my this, all my jobs, my business, my good things, my activities, my reputation. It's not being sarcastic even. In other words, all the things that, because we have attachment now, and because we grasp at things as being permanent now, because we believe in this bubble now, then naturally what we think now is most important is that. So we sustain that bubble. We feed our bodies, we look after our beloveds, we look after our husband, we look after our pension plan, we do our things, we do our budgets, we do this, we take care, we do that. All the activities that we normally do are to sustain the body and the life, the bubble. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. This is a fact. So in other words, we forget, because we forget that it will be gone like a dream at death. We forget that. It's sort of like, all the precious things that we do take care of and that we think about all day because of attachment and because of grasping at permanence of those things. We sustain them, we nourish them, we look after them, we take care of them. And then suddenly you're on a journey and you're carrying all these things with you, and then you've got to stop, you've got to move into another car, and you leave all the other things behind. You spent your life taking care of them, but now you can't have them. I mean, this is the reason most people die with unbelievable fear, because of attachment, mostly, more than anything, not even to the husband and the children and the possessions, but mostly to one's own self, to one's own body. So thinking about throughout our life, living our life in the framework of this scientific reality that things are impermanent. This is a scientific fact. Don't call this religion. It's just common sense. And the benefit of it isn't that you suffer. You don't, I've got to give away my husband, give away my wealth. That's not being said at all. No, you can get the best of both worlds if you're on the Mahayana path. You can learn to recognize it's impermanent. You can use it as a resource. You use your husband and children to help you practice Dharma by being patient and loving and compassionate. You use your money and your resources to help others. Then you've used your life in a most marvelous way, so that when you do die, what are you left with? The marvelous virtuous imprints that you've left in your mind, because they are the only thing that you will bring with you. There's nothing else. That's it. In other words, it's practical. But because, we hear it based on fear, we hear it as punitive, we hear it as punishment, we hear it as heavy, Okay, maybe, yeah. So this is the conclusion, action point. Then we're not at the point yet where we start to practice, but this is again priming our minds in this way that these points are presented. So we're not even ready yet to start practice. Buddha's just, Atisha and Tsongkhapa are priming our mind to get us ready to practice. This is we're getting a wake-up call. We thought about the preciousness of this human life. We decided not to waste it. And now we enter into the path. And now Atisha gets us to increase our wake-up call to realize that this precious life could end at any moment. It's going to end. It will end at any moment. As Lama Zopa says, best to think I will die today. I mean, this is beyond shocking. Best to think I will die today. We're not yet ready to practice, but now the next step after that, he gets us increase our wake-up call and to start to contemplate the likely types of rebirth we could have when we do die, But let's just look more at impermanence. So the first point is death is definite. The second point is the time of death is absolutely not definite. And the third point is what is the thing that's useful to us at that moment? They're the essence of the points, you know. So to unpack these concepts by reading the teachings, and then you think about them, and then you use these as your reference point for the way you live your life. And all the Lamas say, even just beginning to get some semblance of recognition of the truth of impermanence completely transforms our lives. We become much more easygoing, less fearful, less grasping, give up our delusions more easily. You don't become nihilistic. And that's, see, the extremes for us are that we grasp at everything as eternal and permanent. And then we think, well, they're not permanent and eternal, so what's the point? I might as well die now. If Tom's going to leave me today, why bother? That's the nihilistic assumption. And that's not what's meant. No, given that your husband would die, could die, given that you could die, given the house could burn down, given that you could get cancer, these are implicit and truthful, then within that fact, the conclusion is you don't waste it. You don't waste this life. That's the point. That's the way to make it useful. And then as you live your life in terms of this impermanence, at the time of death, you will be ready for it. You'll be ready for death. You'll die with a happy mind. You'll be ready for death. When you realize impermanence, understood everything's impermanent, and therefore because of that, you lessen your attachment, lessen your angers, lessen your fears, lessen your grasping. So life becomes happy, and then you've created virtue, and death will be delicious. Death will be delicious. They say when you die with virtue, death is a very happy experience. Literally, literally. So we can have some questions about this, but we can also then talk about the death process, if you like, from Lama Zopa's book. So what would you like to do? Any questions so far about impermanence?
Yes, there are 2-3 questions.
Please ask me.
Yes, so I will read out the question from Batu. Dear Venerable, how to take the emotional attachment at bay, still show how much you love your families, as well as still being spiritually aware that you have to leave one day.
Right, exactly. This is the point I'm getting at, Basu. This is exactly what we have to practice developing. In other words, and it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. These mistakes in our mind are really subtle. So it doesn't magically change overnight, because like I said before, the instinct we have now is because we're attached to our beloved, whom we do adore, and we love the children, and we have a responsibility. If you're a good father and a good husband, you must take care of them. But what we don't realize, this is my point, is that all that love and kindness, which is also there, is driven by a deep assumption that it's permanent, that it won't change. And that's the part we have to counteract, not giving up the love, not giving up the kindness, but because at the moment our love and kindness and our sense of responsibility as a good husband or good father is based upon an assumption of permanence. So we have to remove that misconception, and then what's left is all the more reason to be loving, all the more reason to be kind and a good father and do the best, because you know everything changes. So it's a much more skillful way to navigate everything. The love and the compassion doesn't stop. In fact, it increases. In other words, that woman who was fearful all the time that her husband would die. And I said to her, well, listen, face the fact, and say to yourself, he will die. And then when you realize that, what's the conclusion? You love him all the more. You take care of him all the more, because you know he might not be there tomorrow. And if you wake up in the morning and he's still alive, it's a bonus. So when you give up grasping at permanence, it increases your sense of responsibility to be a good husband and good father. It increases your sense of love and compassion for others, but you navigate it more skillfully because it becomes more dynamic. Do you understand, Bashu? It's quite subtle thinking, but it's very skillful. Not just chuck the baby out with the bathwater. I was all impermanent. My wife could die tomorrow. Why bother? No, that's nihilism. It's not like that. It's just like that vacation, that 2-day holiday. It is delicious. Just the fact that it's only going to be 2 days doesn't diminish the pleasure I will get. And even, it's just an analogy, a samsaric analogy. So it's still a delicious holiday. It's still a lovely place. So because I know I will only have 2 days, I will use it to the maximum, and I won't be miserable and angry and complain all the time, because I know it's only 2 days, so I'll make the most of it. That's the same with our relationships. You know, you moment by moment, you realize everything is impermanent. So you feel so fortunate if you wake up in the morning and your house is still there and your kids are still there and your wife is still there. You don't grasp at it, but you realize how fortunate, you know. So I'm going to make the most of it. That's what comes from realizing you're impermanent. And then you don't want to waste your life. Do you understand? But it takes time to kind of navigate these misconceptions, to chip away at the misconceptions, because they're quite subtle. It's a really good point.
Okay. So I guess Bashu's second part of the question was just being answered, right, Bashu?
Go on.
Good.
What is it?
And the next one is from Andrea. Ariane, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Yes, Venerable. I do have a question. I talked to a good friend last week, Thursday, and then Sunday she became ill. Monday she was admitted for COVID and she died Tuesday. That perfect example of what you said, you know it's coming, but you don't know when. But it was also a very quick, she coded. So, and my question is, she was a very devout Christian. So I know she believes she's going to be with God, and so does her partner. And that brought her a lot of comfort. Is there a practice, I don't want to interfere, but is there a practice that I can do for her?
I mean, as a Buddhist, Ariane, yes, I don't think it's interfering at all, but you have your practice. So a Buddhist would say do some medicine Buddha prayers, would have prayers done at the monasteries, and that can only help wherever she's at. So that would be a marvelous thing to do. That's not interfering because she's a Christian or a Muslim. I mean, they mightn't like the idea because they think it's a bit shocking maybe, but that's from the Buddhist perspective, you're only helping her wherever she is now, you'll be helping her. So do something like medicine Buddha, it'd be marvelous to do. Something like that.
I did do the medicine Buddha mantra. I've been playing that.
It's wonderful. Perfect, sweetheart. Totally perfect.
That'd be good.
Totally perfect. But this
is helping me. It's helping me too, because I miss her.
That's right. Absolutely. But this is such a good example about the time of death is uncertain, isn't it? Then, I mean, did she come to terms with it? She realized she was dying?
I don't know, because she was on a COVID unit and nobody was allowed to be with her.
Tragedy.
And it happened so fast. I mean, we not even talking on the phone. She was doing well, and then
she wouldn't have been aware she was dying unless somebody said to her. So that's why, if we can understand the point about realizing impermanence, is that you prepare for death. Especially as a Buddhist one, which I want to go through the death process now. Because, so one, you live your life in the framework of impermanence, which causes you to then behave more nicely. It causes you to want to abide by the laws of karma. It causes you to want to be more kind, more wise, less angry, less neurotic, less jealous. That's the point. Not just, oh, yes, I'm impermanent and you keep being a miserable person. No, by realizing impermanence, it changes the way you live your life. So then even when you don't realize you're going to die, you'll be ready for death. But the other one, in the Buddhist one, of course, is to also know about the death process, which I want to discuss in a second. But the one that for me, again, I want to repeat is very shocking. I mean, that's why it's good for you, Ariane. She's a friend, right? She's a friend, yeah?
Yeah, she was a dear friend for probably 20 years.
Okay, so this is the point I'm getting at. You, like she, thought she was permanent. We don't realize it. And then suddenly, within a few days, she's dead, gone like a dream. It's so shocking to us. But the real, and this is the point, I'm sure you realized it, that's when death begins to become real for us. When it's the distant and the ants and the dogs and the strangers in the world, we're kind of a bit surprised by it, or some country gets bombed or something, but it doesn't touch us very deeply. But only when it's our beloved start to die, then we get closer to home. But Ariane, like I said before, the real wake-up call is that you then go, oh my God, that will be me. That's when you get the wake-up call. You get my point?
I did. It was like I smashed into a wall and went,
there you go.
Oh, what do I want to do with the rest of what's important right now? Because that could have been me.
That's exactly that. And it will be you.
And it will be me.
It will be you. But we don't know when. That's the real wake up call. Then it really comes home to us. And because the fact is, I mean, that's why I'm sure we did talk about this before, but there's this hilarious story. They always tell us in the texts. This Tibetan astrologer, right? He'd done his own chart. And on the chart, his own chart said that he'd die today. Well, the first instinct he has, of course, is he didn't believe it. So there he was pondering. The story goes something like this. He's sitting there with his elbow on the windowsill and there's these wooden shutters and he's got some pokey thing that he's poking his ear, thinking about where he made a mistake in his astrological calculations, and the shutter hit his elbow and put the thing into here and he died. But his instinct was, where did I make a mistake? Because he assumed, of course, he wouldn't die today. That's how deep our grasping at permanence is. It's very hilarious. I mean, it's a joke. It's hilarious, but it's not. It's tragic. Because we can't stand the thought of me not being me. That's what Lama Zopa says. Now let's discuss the death process, unless there are other questions. Thank you, Ariane. Are there other questions there?
Yes, from Alina. Alina, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hello, sweetheart.
Hi. I would have a question also regarding the wake-up call issue, because just on the story, what Ariane said, it's very vibrant even for me now, that it's so understandable that it can go so quickly. But when I then wake up tomorrow, I'm in my daily life with my minor problems, kind of, and for me it's hard to. The question is, do you need actually the kind of traumatic experience to get the wake-up call, or is it more that you to realize it in the body and not just intellectually, that you just gradually do your practice, work on the attachment? Is that the strategy?
That's the point. That's what that's exactly what the Lam Rim is all about. It's preparing, it's thinking about what is true, or it's when a person dies and it's a shock to us, it's because we lived in denial. So don't wait. In other words, don't wait till you have the shock. That's the point. Don't wait till the shock to realize your impermanence. You've been impermanent all the time. It's just because we get sucked into the belief in this permanent bubble because everything is going so nicely. So we believe, because we're so attached and we love it to be nice, we then can't stand not to have the nice husband, not to have the nice Tom, not to have the nice job, that we then put this permanence on top of it. So that's a lie. So we've got to give ourselves the wake-up call. That's the whole point, honey. And that's why nothing comes overnight. That's Bashu's point. All of us. It takes a while to unpack and unravel these misconceptions. It takes a while to even recognize them. We've got to start somewhere. We've got to start somewhere. It's like training. When your first day at the gym, you don't suddenly look beautiful. The first day you practice piano, you don't suddenly play Bach. The first time you play tennis, you don't play tennis. It's a process. It's exactly the same with our mind. We've got to start somewhere with the thoughts. And then slowly they become experiential and we'll realize the truth of impermanence, thus fundamentally change the entire way we see the world. That's the point. Do you understand, darling?
Yeah. And would it be also, I don't know if it's like a good strategy, but to make my circumstances harder, that I learn faster?
Sweetheart, listen, if you've got such renunciation, you want to give up, you can give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and give up the husband and money and the things and the food and go to the mountains. Well, honey child, you go for it. But, one step at a time, please.
Yeah, okay. I'm not ready for this. I have to be honest.
Just deal with what we've got right now, I'd say. It's very sensible.
Yeah.
And the one is, you see, also the one is with the impermanence. This is the thing about, this is why we say we don't like change, but we don't know, but it's maybe more because we do like change when bad things change into good things. That change we like. But the tragedy is, let's say, the one like when you say you believe your husband won't die, this woman, and let's say one day he does die, then first of all, she couldn't stand the thought of it changing, so she clung to it and lived in fear. And then when he does die, suddenly the bubble bursts and she collapses into despair. And now the grasping at things as permanent kicks in as being that this suffering will never end. And so you never see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's why we kill ourselves. So either way, seeing things as impermanent makes us deal with the delicious things and enjoy them all the more, and makes us much more strong and capable of dealing with the bad things because we know that they change as well.
Yeah.
We won't be so up and down like yo-yos, When everything's going perfectly, we're up in the sky with divine heaven. Now I found happiness. Now it'll last forever. And then when Tom left, I always joke when Tom left Nicole for Penelope Cruz, it's always a joke, I say it. Then she crashed down to despair. And if you couldn't pick yourself up, but that's why we kill ourselves. That's why people get profoundly depressed, because attachment, because the bubble has burst. And now we think that is permanent. That's the big tragedy, But neither. Bad things change and good things change. And in both cases, we are more equipped to handle it and to navigate it when we realize impermanence.
is it then, just one last question, if it's okay with the time, is it then
How do
would
we
you
stop constant flashing? Have you got flashing on the screen all the time, Talia? My picture, and you haven't. Okay, my
No.
picture it's very flashing. Never mind. Go on and speak. Keep speaking.
yeah, would then be like, or what do you think, to like an attitude that I trust that the problems will be at the right time, and that's kind of like my training schedule? Oh no, it's
Robina, you're mute.
No, that's not superstitious. You don't think it'll happen at the right time. Just things will happen when the karma ripens. If you're clairvoyant, you will know when they're going to happen, baby. You're not clairvoyant, so you live your life every minute, knowing it's impermanent. Do the best you can every day, and then accept what comes. You don't say it'll happen at the right time. That's nonsense.
okay.
I mean, if you're clairvoyant and you know exactly when things are going to happen, then you can be prepared. You're fine, dear. Do you understand? Just live your life as the best you can within the reality of impermanence. Therefore, you try to do a good job every day. You deal with your mind. You try to be a happy person. You try not to harm others. That's all coming. That's all. This is practice, and we're coming to it, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you understand?
Yeah, I think I'm very impatient. That's why I asked
All
this
right,
question.
darling. Impatient is attachment wanting to get what it wants when it wants. And then anger is the response when it doesn't. So, but that's all coming. We're not even at that level of practice yet. We're just trying to, at this point, we're trying to be very specific and recognize that things change. I will die, not sure when. So at the time of death, what's important to me? That's all we're doing here. Now we've got to go to the next steps before we even begin to actually practice. We haven't even begun to practice yet. We're priming our minds ready for practice by thinking about impermanence, you know.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Elise. Thanks, sweetheart. Thanks, Elise. What else there, Talia? Anything?
Yes, I myself have one question if time allows.
Yes.
So my mother several years ago went for a surgery of liver surgery to remove a tumor from liver, and then so the surgery was relatively successful according to the doctor. But she then came out of the surgery, and then she got up to walk, and then she fainted, and then she died.
And this is very, I mean, it's like a joke, but it's tragic, isn't it?
Right. So even though we understand impermanence, and we kind of ready that she was gonna go if it doesn't go well, but still it took lots of time for grieving. It takes maybe several years, 5 to 7 years. So does that mean that we don't understand permanence, that we don't really take it in the heart, or it's just a normal process?
Of course, it's a normal process, but darling, Talia, it is normal. But when we analyze what a normal person is a person who's got attachment, a person who's got a heart, a person who's got grasps at permanence. That's so-called normal. But it depends on the person. I mean, each person's very different. You know, some people have less attachment to their mummy. The more attachment we have to our mummy, the more, or any person, the more we will experience, the more grief we will experience, and the harder it will be to stop the experience, to stop the pain. So there's a whole series of things. There's a strong karmic connection between you and your mother. There's a stronger bond, a strong attachment. You loved your mother, I presumed, you know, so you suffered because, but when you're a normal person, you've got attachment. You've got, you grasp at things as permanent. So the degree to which we have this is the degree to which you then have to take time to let go of the suffering. But I'm not so sure that when you say it's taken you 7 years, I mean, I think you're probably confusing the sadness of losing the attachment that's been pained with simply loving your mother. I mean, are you really sure that it took you 7 years to stop suffering? I don't believe that. I just think you still love your mother. That's enough. That's not grief. That's just common sense. His Dalai Lama, when his mother died, he would cry, but then 3 minutes later, he cracked a joke because it didn't take his heart away. So I'm not sure you really 7 years is how long you suffered. Because what grief is, Talia, there's not a term like that in Buddhist psychology. I think it's a combination of several things. One is, first of all, the strong karmic connection between you and your mummy, very strong history together. And then 2, you have a lot of, I presume you loved your mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
You loved your mother. You didn't have many sufferings you weren't angry with her and that kind of thing. No, okay. No. So you love your mother, which is amazing. And so then there's also seeing her as permanent because you want her to be there. So the grief is a combination of attachment, the close connection, and also the love. And then the sadness when you see that she's not there anymore. But that's not necessarily deluded. The attachment is deluded. I remember talking to one man who had unbelievable attachment for his wife. She'd been dead like 12 years. He was still completely shattered. He couldn't live life. He was destroyed. That's when you can't get over the attachment. I don't think that's how your experience is.
Yeah, that's right. And that took about 1 year.
Well, there you go. That's right. So then you're not having grief any longer. It's just a natural loss because you're a human being. You've got a close connection with this woman. You love her, and it's sad to know she's not there. That doesn't mean that's deluded. But if it rips your heart out and you become ineffective and you get depressed and want to kill yourself, that's when it's serious. That's when it's delusions. Do you understand? But
yes.
The point is also this, Talia, when we do realize the reality it is impermanent, it's not that you won't suffer, you'll still be sad, but you'll heal much more quickly. Because you see, one of the commonest ways we suffer when somebody dies, especially when we think it's unfair, or if they're young, or if they're sick, I mean, would be because we think it shouldn't have happened. So easily, if you'd been a lot of anger, you would have sued the hospital. Why didn't you find out she had a bad heart? But you just accepted the reality. In other words, the karma of your mother was so strong to die, even though her operation was successful, she died next day. It's like a friend of mine, he went to Los Angeles to help his daddy die. He had cancer. Well, the cancer got better. They were literally one day having a party celebrating the cancer going, and next day he died of a heart attack. Same as your mum, because the karma, the petrol tank of the daddy and your mummy to live, which is, had literally run out as much as you try to keep a person alive. So things are impermanent. That's why we always grasping at straws, Do you understand what I'm saying? It's very interesting.
I still have to think about it more.
Of course, darling. But these delusions are really deep in our mind. They don't go overnight. This grasping at permanence is really evident to us. This is far grosser than the grasping at instinct of inherent me. Emptiness is much more subtle, but impermanence is pretty subtle already. And it just takes time. It just takes time. But the real one, for me, for Ariane's point, and you with your mummy, this is the one we totally forget. As I said before, when other people die out there, we kind of get a bit of, okay, that's death. But when it comes close to home, when our beloved dies, when our mummy dies, when our friend dies, we suffer because we experience terrible grief and loss because of our attachment, because of our humanity, because of the close connection. It's not all deluded. The attachment part is, and the grasping at permanence, like he shouldn't have died. That's the anger that people often have, so they can never get past that. But the real learning, when your beloved dies, is then you've got to think, this will happen to me. That's when it's the best opportunity to get the wake-up call. This will happen to me. Then we can really start. And then the pain will eventually go, the loss will go, the grief will go, but then we'll become more confident and we'll live our life without wasting it. I've talked to so many people, let's say, who've been given the wake-up call by being told they've got cancer, or something like that. And so the ones who really want to make the most of it, that's the wake-up call that, this is Elisa's point, don't wait for the wake-up call to come. We're impermanent now. We don't have to be told we're impermanent by getting cancer. But if we can use that opportunity, many people do that. It's the hugest wake-up call because it demands, what's the purpose of life then? Oh my God, all this I've worked for, all this delicious bubble I've had all my life, suddenly it's gone like a dream. What's the point of it all? So if it makes us, and this is what Atisha's trying to get at, it's a wake-up call. Use it. What is important? What is valuable? What is the point of life? It's great that we have this thinking. We need to answer it. It's marvelous. If we can be brave enough, then every experience in life can be our learning, which is the point, And all that Tisha's getting us to do, all Tsongkhapa's getting us to do, is to get that wake-up call before it punches us in the nose, Do you understand, people?
Yes, Ven Robina. And could I have a follow-up question? What if, sometimes I know we do many practices to visualize death, the death processes, or like going to bed thinking you won't wake up tomorrow. But what if you actually have fear of getting sick and dying?
It's the same thing. What do you mean? It's just more vivid for some people. Some people have that fear. Of course, that's the point. We're talking about that. What do you mean? As if that's something different, though, Talia. That's just exactly the point. You're living in fear of the thing that you're attached to, and you can't stand the thought of it ending. It's called attachment, sweetheart. This is not meant to be glib. You see, these Buddhist teachings are quite technical and quite precise. The emotional component of our living in denial of reality is the pain we have, but we've got to start to have the theories correct, and then slowly we put meat on the bones of those theories. So the reason we live in fear, that woman living in fear every day that her husband would die, is because she can't stand the thought of not having a husband. The people have fear even walking out the street. You might get knocked over. People live in fears. Fear is because of attachment to things not being the way we hope they'd be. And it's the worst nightmare for some people, the worst nightmare, you know.
Yes, got it. Got it. Very clear.
This is the thing, you know, attachment, we haven't even begun. That's in high school. We've got to get to that eventually. Attachment is this complete junky manipulator inside us that is frantic to get everything the way we want it to be. This is why we suffer so tremendously, because we can see every day we can't make what our attachment wants to happen. We just can't do it. So this is constant, you know, this we're going to go into this between attachment wanting what it wants and then not getting what it wants. This is the point, the meeting point of our insanity. It's like a nightmare. You know, people drive in cars and they're afraid of crashing. People walk out at night are afraid of a rapist. People, you know, eat a certain food, you're afraid. People we live in fear, and fear is a product of all the misconceptions because they're liars. We have a thought of what one thing is, but it's disconnected with what reality is, and that's why we have fear. That's what they mean by samsara. When we have given up delusions, when we have realized emptiness, literally there is no fear. Our minds are radiant and clear and blissful and in sync with reality, which doesn't mean we have immense compassion, but you don't suffer. This is hard for us to understand.
Totally, Venerable. So it's a very busy day today for questions. Do we have time for 2 more questions?
It's important to have questions.
Okay, so Wendy, please unmute yourself.
Robina.
Yes, sweetheart.
Hi. So if someone commits suicide,
yes,
and they die, is that their karma?
Every millisecond of whatever we think and do and say, first and foremost, is already programmed in our mind from having thought or said or done that at some point. Secondly, everything we think and do and say then will sow seeds in the mind that will determine the results that arise. So if a person has the thought, I want to kill myself, that's because that thought has been there before. The mind runs to that tendency. Many people never, no matter how much suffering they have, no matter how nightmarish life is, some people might never go to that thought because that tendency isn't in their mind. Some people might think of it all the time. That tendency is strongly programmed in their mind.
But is it their death karma?
What do you mean by that, darling? What do you mean by, so what's that question?
I know some people who have committed suicide and it's been successful, right?
That's right.
And then I know people who have attempted suicide and it's
That's right. That's a different discussion. That's a different discussion. So whether what you want to do manifests as getting the result, then obviously all the conditions didn't come together. So a person intended to, some people die without even intending to. Karma takes care and the car knocks them over. Some people intend to die and put the conditions together and they get the result. And some people intend to die and take the medicine, but they wake up again. That's just because all the conditions didn't come together. It's like you want, you know, many conditions have to come together for something to come to fruition. So in the case of getting rich, maybe you didn't, you know, all the conditions didn't come together. Maybe finding the right boyfriend, all the conditions don't come together. Sometimes you find the boyfriend even if you don't want to. So it depends on all the conditions coming together. So of course that's the simple answer. And then as to whether it's negative or positive, that's another whole discussion. And we'll discuss that when we talk about karma. Yeah. What else?
Yes.
Charlie.
Cyril has a question.
Yes, hello, Venerable Robina.
Who's got the question?
Cyril.
Cyril, hi, sweetheart, talk to me.
Hi. I'm going to read it because it took me a long time to formulate it. So
well, then try and just ask the question. Don't give the background. See if you can cut the chase and ask the question.
Okay, I understand how grasping and impermanence comes from attachment. But isn't it also the case that grasping at permanence comes from mental images being by nature permanent? What is the difference between...
I don't know. Oh dear, Cyril, I don't understand that point, darling. I want to understand you. Can you say it in another way, please? Didn't quite understand.
We grasp at permanence.
We grasp at things wanting them
because of attachment.
That we want it to be there, exactly.
Yes.
So then,
but I think we also grasp at permanence because mental images are by nature permanent.
yeah, but that's just too intellectual, Cyril. You've learned that when you studied low read. I understand that. But that's not the permanent we're discussing here. There's another whole meaning in Buddhist philosophy, which I'm sure you understand, about the meaning of permanent. So there's a subtler meaning. So one function of something that is impermanent, it means it changes from moment to moment. It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't last. It changes from moment to moment. That's a subtle impermanence. Now, permanent in the way you're describing is that there are some phenomena that Alex Berzin refers to them as abstract phenomena. They are not impermanent in their character, which simply means they don't have the dynamic of changing from moment to moment. Emptiness is an example. The absence of something is an example. The cessation of something is an example. A mental image is an example of that. It's a completely another level of the meaning of permanence, Cyril.
But if I see something and I create a mental image of it, and by nature this mental image of it is permanent, isn't it natural that I'm gonna grasp at it and see it as permanent?
No, Cyril, you just repeated your question. I tried to answer it, but it didn't work for you, obviously. It's not the meaning there at all. It's not the meaning of it. A permanent phenomenon in the way you're describing, because you've learned that a mental image is permanent. It's an abstract phenomenon. You can't touch it or taste it or smell it or see it. That is not an impermanent phenomenon. It is a different type of phenomenon. Berzin calls it abstract. That's got zero to do with the fact, because your mind is impermanent, anger is impermanent, attachment is impermanent, your beloved is impermanent, trees are impermanent, the things that we cling to are impermanent. That's the point. I don't know if that helps you.
I still need to think about it, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So Cyril, the girlfriend that you're attached to is impermanent. You believe you put on top of her, or whatever it is you're attached to, a fantasy of her not changing. That's where the suffering is. But the image in your mind, the abstract image in your mind, is not a dynamic impermanent. But that's got nothing to do with your suffering. Nothing whatsoever.
So, I see. So how does that influence anything? What does that influence? The image, the mental image of her being permanent.
It's just a term that's used for the way when you study Buddhist epistemological model of the mind. It's a very sophisticated, very subtle presentation of the way conceptuality works. It's super sophisticated, and one aspect in there is that there's a mental image of something. That's all. But it's got nothing to do. It's a technical way that your mind functions. It's a very specific technical thing. It's got little to do with the dynamic experience of attachment and suffering and all those things every day to day.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Cyril.
That helps a lot.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Please, anyone else?
Yes.
Any more questions?
Yelena has another question.
Hello, I'm sorry, I have another question.
Good, darling, go.
My question is, because before you talked about fear, and how I understand is that fear is mainly the response of that we lose something and it triggers our attachment and the grasping. And from a biological, I don't know if it's the right term, you also could say fear is important because when a dangerous animal attacks you, you can make decisions quickly. And I would like to know what the Buddhist view is on fear. Is there any positive function of fear that it shows
the fear you're describing then, the fear you're describing, I think is Mr. Darwin, wasn't it? Or somebody who came up with the instinct for survival. In other words, the assumption we have when we observe animals and humans, the assumption the thing we deduce when we observe animals who are threatened or humans who are threatened, we deduce that when the heart beats and this alert, this kind of shock comes, oh my God, I'm being abused. Oh my God, I'm being nearly run over by the car. Oh my God, I'm being attacked. We see that everyone experiences that. And so we assume it's necessary. Well, Buddha says, what a load of rubbish. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he was drowning, he tells this story, was a little boy. Okay, Lama Zopa was said to be the reincarnation of a great yogi from his past life. The assumption being he'd realized emptiness. He'd cut all the delusions. He'd cut fear. This is very bizarre for us in our culture to think that's a possibility. So next life, he chooses his next life. He's this little yogi. He gets recognized as a little boy. He's up in the mountains. He's about 8 years old, and he tells the story about how there were these strange looking people across the river, pale face, pale eyes, straw-colored hair, white people, obviously, but maybe Swedes even. Anyway, he wanted to meet them. So he told a story about how he took his little bowl of potatoes, because that's what Sherpas have, and he walked on this rickety bridge and he fell in the water. Of course, they're very, very torrential rivers there, fell into the river. And this is how he told the story. He said, the head kept coming to the surface for air. Then he said, so what you would have seen is a little boy coming up for air, looking like he was scared, But he said, the head. He didn't say, my head. Or he didn't. So then he said, he said to himself, the thought occurred to me that the person known as the Laudo Lama, that was who he's said to be the reincarnation of, the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. But he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. So what that is telling us exactly, the way he talked, his experience is the exact description of a person who's realized emptiness. When you've realized emptiness, you have finally realized that the primordial I that we cling to as real and inherent, which gives rise to attachment and anger and jealousy and grasping at things as permanent and all the other dramas, that there has never been, there isn't, and never could be that fantasy I. And when you realize that, all the other delusions crumble into dust. So there is no basis for fear. So fear is instinct for survival is a good word for ego grasping. So it's a load of rubbish. So basically, we would assume that if he did not have fear, he would have sunk to the bottom of the river going, oh, well, I'm drowning. It doesn't matter. Don't be stupid. We don't need fear to decide that someone's shooting us. We use common sense. And the reality is fear makes a mess. Fear freaks you out. Fear makes you panic and do the wrong thing. Intelligence is what gets you to see there's a gunman in front of you. Intelligence gives you the ability with a calm mind to decide what to do. So it's nonsense. I would say it's a nonsense assertion based on that thinking. Are you with me?
Yeah, thank you very much. This was very helpful.
Good. So I'm looking forward to having no fear. I mean, there's nothing like in our psychology, we just assume fear is normal. I mean, what a depressing view. Buddha has found that it's a load of nonsense. So can you imagine being free of fear? But listen to this, you don't have to wait till you realize emptiness to get rid of fear. It's one step at a time. As soon as you start to live in sync with impermanence, what do you think? You'll have less fear. When you start to live in just impermanence, when you start to realize the truth that you're not permanent, that your husband isn't permanent, that the house isn't permanent, suddenly you are released, already less fear. Less fear as you progress all the way to being blissfully, completely free of fear by the time you realize emptiness. It's a gradual process. Fear is a product of all delusions. Fear is the nature of grasping at permanence, of attachment, of anger, of jealousy, low self-esteem, anxiety, all those, they are rooted in fear. Their flavor is fear. So the whole process is going beyond fear. I'm looking forward to it. What else, people?
There's no more questions.
Okay, let's talk about the death process in this last 30 minutes we have. And we can maybe do more next time. We'll see what happens. So this is from the Vajrayana teachings, and it's just extremely helpful. So Rinpoche in his book goes through both aspects: how to prepare for death, like we're discussing here, facing reality, recognizing the reality that things are impermanent, recognizing the reality that I am impermanent, this is the real one, you know, and that's the wake-up call we get from when our puppy dog dies, our beloved husband dies, whatever, you know. We become more stable, more realistic, more brave, more courageous, more conscious. So the other one, that's one, to live your life in the framework of impermanence, which means you become a better person. And then the other one is learning to know how to navigate the actual experience itself. So Zama Zopa says in his book very clear, when our beloved needs us most, when our little pussycat needs us most, when the doggy needs us most, and that mouse you find who's dying needs us most, is at the time that they start the death process. So generally speaking, you know, the Vajrayana model describes about 8, kind of this is gradual stages of 8, a gradual process of deconstruction of 8 stages, described in terms of 8 stages, you know. So, and it's, yeah, so just roughly speaking. And this is based on the Vajrayana model of the universe, which is similar to the Tibetan medical system, the one the Tibetan medical system uses. And it's also, interestingly, exactly the same process that occurs every time we go to sleep. It's the same process of deconstruction. It's very interesting, which is why the great yogis use their sleep, going to sleep, as a method for preparing for death. That's more advanced, you know. So the first, there's 8 stages of this gradual deconstruction of the components of the person. And this is based on the whole model that the universe consists of minds, and then there's matter, and all matter is made of the 4 elements. And interestingly, this model describes how all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. And the more we understand this, the more it helps understand how we create karma, and we'll talk about that. So the first stage of death, you know, is various things cease at each of these stages. So the first level, your eye consciousness begins to cease. You can't see so clearly. The capacity to hold a lot of information in your mind ceases. Your earth element ceases. The body becomes very heavy. And at each of these stages, this is a very simple example, very simple description. And at each of these stages, they describe them in terms of a certain kind of subtle vision that only the yogis can see, but which occurs every time, but we're not aware of it. And this one is called a mirage. So there's a subtle thing at the interplay of earth element and water element, which is the next one to go. There's this kind of subtle kind of image of a mirage. And this is an indicator for the yogis. They know where they're going, you know. The next one is your ear consciousness begins to cease. The water element dries up. The ability to even distinguish between pleasure, pain, and indifference ceases. So you're kind of gradually losing the plot, you know. And this exactly happens every time you go to sleep. Exactly the same. You can be sitting up there talking to your friend and you become really tired. Your body's like lead, isn't it? And your eyes, they're open, but you can't even hardly see anything. And then you get to the next stage and you stopped, you didn't hear that last 20 seconds of what your beloved said, because you're looking at him, you're listening, but everything is going in, everything is deconstructing. All these elements are ceasing to function. So then, you know, or when you're driving the car and you're really tired, it's really hard to keep your eyes open, isn't it? Because these elements are ceasing. The elements, the 4 elements and the different components of the mind are ceasing to function. The third one is, the second one is the vision that occurs there, as they call it, the vision of sparks, like fire. So because the interplay now of smoky, like steamy, smoky, because it's the interplay of the water element, which has ceased at the second level, and now the prevalence of the fire element. So the next stage, the fire element ceases, the ability to distinguish between friends, enemies, and strangers. You've got your beloved sister on one side of your deathbed and your ugly old auntie over that side, and you can't tell the difference. You're losing the plot, you know, your bits and pieces are deconstructing. Your senses deconstructing, this element ceasing to function. So then by the time the third stage, your ability to distinguish between friends, enemies, and strangers, your, which element ceases there? Can't remember. Or your capacity to, which sense, the capacity to see, hear, I think touch ceases, and smell and taste. 3, isn't it? Touch, smell, maybe the smell goes now. Now by this point is about where this is where now another whole series, another whole presentation kicks in. It's from the Sutra teachings, and it's the 12 links of dependent arising. And Lama Zopa has a chapter in the book, particular function of the 12 links at the time of death. So the 8th and 9th links, and these occur every day in our life, but they have a particular function at death. 8th is called craving, and the 9th is called grasping. And simply speaking, they're very powerful levels of attachment, intense holding on to something. And this is why death is so fearful for everybody, because this is a primordial level of attachment that kicks in, and the main attachment object is me, and me on the basis of this body. It's beyond, it's like intense, really intense fear because of this intense grasping. So attachment's multifaceted. Attachment wants to hold on to something. Attachment thinks about the past, thinks about the future, anticipates. But now, because you're dying, and especially if you haven't prepared for death, you know, what is there to look forward to? If you've never thought of death, if you don't have a Christian practice, if you don't have a Buddhist practice, and you're a materialist, the only thing you're going to look forward to is a black hole. Who wants to fall into a black hole? Absolutely nobody. So we live in denial of death, you know. So the enormous fear, because you've never thought about it, you have no view about what will happen. Nobody else around you has ever had any view. You've lived in denial, and now finally this is happening. So the fear is quite intense. So this is when you need to help your loved one navigate. So if you've had a practice all your life, you won't be unhappy. The grasping will still come, but your mind will be so virtuous. You'll be thinking, let's say you're a Catholic, you'll be thinking about God. And this is the interesting point about attachment. Lama Zopa says you can use this at death. You can look forward to going to heaven. You can't look forward to a black hole. That's too horrifying. But you can, by thinking about God, you talk to your loved one about how God loves you. You look forward to heaven. If you're a Buddhist, you can look forward to a human rebirth. So you're utilizing your attachment skillfully to look forward to something useful, and your mind will be peaceful. Because the crucial point here is that grasping is the trigger, is the particular thing that activates the number 2 link, which is the karmic seed that will be the one that out of your billions of karmic seeds in your bank vaults will be triggered, that will determine your next life. So essentially, if that grasping completely takes over and you just have enormous fear, and the tragedy is most people die like that, they're not ready, they're drugged out of their brains because they're in an old people's home and there's too many people to take care of, or it's an animal living in incredible fear, with, you know, panicking about who's going to attack them. Unbelievable fear, most people have it. Then that will trigger a negative seed. And then when you do, and then that already is programming you to go to a suffering rebirth. But if you're navigating that, or you've got beloveds helping you, and you're hearing the prayers of your Lama, or you're listening to Jesus's teachings, or whatever it is that helps you calm down when you're virtuous and people are supporting you, then when that grasping is triggered, it will trigger a positive seed, and then death will be a really peaceful experience. I mean, there's so many examples of that. A friend of mine fell off the roof at Vajrapani Institute. This is 40 years ago and he fell off the roof, and he was in and he's a Buddhist, and his wife is there, and he's dying in her arms. She said he was radiant, he was blissful, because as he's dying, a virtuous seed, mind must have been virtuous, a virtuous karmic seed was triggered, and as you're dying, your mind is getting more subtle, and when your mind is more subtle, it's like you can see what's coming. So the people for whom a negative seed is triggered, they say in the text, and people report this, they're freaking out, they're panicking, it's like they're seeing hallucinations, because they're seeing their future suffering life. So this is when you need a person most, the mouse, the dog, the cat, be as conscious as you can, help the person be secure, help them. I mean, cats can't have much virtuous mind, but they can be calm. You can help them by playing mantras. This is a powerful imprint in their mind. This is for your loved one as well. I mean, Rinpoche talks about all the different practices you can do. And then you help them. And then once that karmic seed is triggered, you're programmed for your next life. You know, maybe a few weeks later, your mummy and daddy hop into bed and you run like a magnet, you know. So that's about the 3rd time. You're not even out, you haven't even lost the plot yet. You're not even dead yet. That's when the karmic seed is triggered. That's when you need to be peaceful and virtuous. Because when the mind is peaceful, virtuous karmic seeds can be triggered. When the mind is freaking out, it only triggers a negative seed. It's just natural, it's psychological. It's not blame, it's not punishment, it's not reward. For the mouse and the dog and the baby and the grandma are the same. So then the 4th step is, but finally now you can't even recognize who you are. You've lost the plot completely. Your breathing goes out and doesn't come in. Your tactile consciousness ceases. Your tongue that used, as one Geshe says, Geshe Rabton, one of my teachers, I love this, that tongue that spent it's now turned blue at the root and has gone short, apparently. And he said that tongue that has spent its life gossiping is now useless. So then you stop breathing. Now that's death for the West. It is not death for Buddha, not for this tradition. It can be 3 days before your mind leaves the body, because that's only called your gross consciousness. So the gross consciousness is linked to the sensory consciousness. That's now ceased. But the subtle mind is still there. So there's a continual process of deconstruction. And they describe the subtle consciousness as coursing through these 72,000 subtle channels throughout the body, inextricably linked with all the different wind energies. It's highly sophisticated. And it's the basis of health in the Tibetan medical system, similar to the Chinese, similar to the Ayurvedic, no longer the method we use in the allopathic system, of course. So then gradually, so the components of our subtle body, we've got gross consciousness and gross body. That's this baggage here. We've got subtle consciousness and subtle body. And that subtle body, there's 72,000 subtle channels throughout the body. The wind energies coursing through all those channels, and the different states of mental consciousness. Mental consciousness, like thoughts and feelings and emotions, we access them at our gross level, but they are subtle in their nature. So then what happens, there's another component of our subtle body. The subtle body is the 72,000 subtle channels, the prana or wind energy coursing through those channels, and then the subtle liquid energy called kundalini, which is a subtle red and white drop that come from the parents at the time of our past conception. At the time of conception of this life, when the mother and father, egg and sperm joined, our consciousness from the previous life was programmed in our past death, ran to that egg and sperm, and then our very subtle consciousness, now our very subtle consciousness, when it comes to the 8th stage, conjoins with a subtle level of that egg and sperm, as a subtle red and white kundalini, they call it. So our very subtle consciousness joins with that. And that red and white kundalini is going in these different channels. So these start to deconstruct. The white one first, then there's a white vision, the 5th sign, there's a white, it goes down from the crown to the heart chakra. There's these chakras, these various points where all these channels are all constricted. Here, the 72,000, remember, and a bunch are constricted here. There's a central channel all the way down from here towards the back of your, near the back of your head, that goes all the way down in front of the spine and ends at the penis for the boys and the cervix for the girls. So you've got the wind energies coursing in these channels. A constriction of these channels are here at the crown chakra, throat, heart, below the navel, and 3 at the end, on the external for the boys and internal for the girls. So these different constrictions of these different channels. So then this one, the white one, goes down. The white kundalini predominates at the crown chakra, and at the 5th stage, it melts down and goes to the heart. And then there's a vision of like white sky they talk about. This is very keeping it simple. Then the red one, the 6th stage, the red one comes up from the navel. The red is the basis of the heat in the body, and the white one is the basis of the ability to experience bliss or joy or happiness, happy feelings. The red one comes up and comes to the heart chakra, and then there's a red vision like a dawn sky. Then the 7th one is like the two, they join, this indestructible drop at the heart, which come from the parents at the beginning of conception, and our very subtle consciousness is there. So the 7th one is like a dark vision, and then the 8th one is the clear light. This drop opens, and then the clear light consciousness, which is this very subtle consciousness, the subtlest level of our conscious being. So this is a gradual deconstruction. And that process, from the time you stop breathing until the time the clear light mind comes, when you leave the body, that can take up to 3 days, So then the mind leaves the body. When it leaves the body, that drop will open, and the very subtle consciousness or clear light consciousness will leave. And that second is the end. That's when you die. That's death. That could be up to 3 days after you stop breathing. So in this system, it's absolutely crucial not to disturb the body for at least 3 days, as much as you can. And all in Lama Zopa's book, of course, he looks at all these different scenarios of what to do if your loved one dies in hospital. You have 30 minutes if you're lucky. What to do if your loved one gives their organs. What to do if your loved one, dies quickly, dies suddenly. There's different scenarios. So it's explaining this process and then how to help your loved one to the best of your ability throughout those stages. And so what happens then, the very subtle mind leaves the body, driven by the karma that was triggered before you even stop breathing. You're already programmed. And in our case, we can deduce that a virtuous karmic seed was triggered in our past life, because here we are, we got human. So we woke up in this intermediate state, just like a dream state. It's your subtle mind after you leave the body. You even can see your body, but you have no interest in it. The karma's finished, And so then you're in this intermediate state, which is just like a dream state. and it lasts up to 7 weeks. And then when in our case, when our new mummy and daddy hopped into bed, our present mummy and daddy, then we left the intermediate state, went through the reverse process and ran like a magnet into that egg and sperm. And that's how our new life began. So I asked him some questions about that process. That was quite quick.
Yes, Venerable. Can we have Katya asking the question, then Wendy?
Yes, good.
Hi, Robina.
Yes, darling.
My question is, in the Western world, when people get diagnosed with death, they usually
with death.
With death when they're dead.
Okay. I mean, they're said to be dead. Yes. Okay. Good. Good.
Yes. Usually they get brought away very fastly.
That's right. Exactly.
So they're put in boxes and then put in cars and then driven wherever.
That's right.
Does that affect the subtle consciousness?
Of course it can, yes. That's the point, exactly. That's exactly the point. Of course it can. I mean, you know, I know that different people have different views, like the Jews say you've got to be buried as quickly as possible. So of course, this is this particular view. It can be very distressing because if you disturb the body, and that's why even giving organs can be quite distressing, because if the person, you know, there's this, I'll tell you, we can talk about it more next week. I think this is an interesting topic. But yeah, absolutely, of course it can. Of course, it doesn't follow, it will, but of course it can, absolutely. Until you're certain the mind is gone is the best to not before you touch the body. That's the ideal scenario according to this system. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Because the karmic seed will be the one that will determine your life, is triggered before you die. But that could change if the body's freaked out. If you freak out the person by destroying their body or messing their body or burning them too quickly or even burying them. I mean, one of the common things that is really in all cultures, we know that people come back to life, you know. They come back to life. So you imagine if you're in a coffin and you're dead and you're under the ground and you wake up again. I mean, this is not uncommon. So this, yes, it can be very distressing. Absolutely, can be.
So let's say there was maybe a good, like a virtuous seed for a good reincarnation for that person. And then suddenly, no, it doesn't, no, it's only when they die, right? In the last moment when they breathe.
What?
That the virtues of the reincarnation.
The time, generally speaking, that the karmic seed that will determine the person's next life, whether it's negative or positive, is triggered about that third stage of death. That's right.
Okay.
So if a negative seed is triggered and that person is destined for the lower realms, I mean, Rinpoche's got all this in the book. There are practices you can do to help reverse it. Even if they're in the bardo, you know, there are practices you can do to reverse it. Well, it follows logically also, if the karmic seed was triggered before you stopped breathing, was virtuous, but then your body got messed up and then it upset your mind. And so a negative one is now triggered. You can also do something about that as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Then
Yeah.
the couple queue, like people in the queue. So the idea is to give someone who hasn't asked a question first. So first we go to Andrea, and then we go to Wendy again, then we go to Bas.
Good, darling.
Oh,
well, we'll continue this topic next week because it's a really important one. We'll have time next week. But it's important that also all this is in that course book you've got. So I suggest you read because there's more detail in the course book. So you read about this. I mean, it's a variation of what I've been saying now, you know. Yes, please. Anybody else have a question? Person.
Dear Venerable, my question is that how can we help to a person who is a materialistic person at the time of death?
Exactly. Yes, good point. That's where so the idea is the background to how we help. This is my way of putting it, is that when a person is dying, whether it's a mouse or an atheist or whatever it might be, the bottom line is to make it really conducive environment so that encourages their mind to be peaceful. Whether it's the mouse, the bird, the dog, whatever, that's the real point. So if it's a Buddhist, then you know their mind well. You've got to know their mind well. So you do Buddhist things, which supports their mind. If they're a Christian, now if they're an atheist, you help them be peaceful. That means, and one of the crucial things, and Rinpoche mentions this as one of the practices, you love them, you praise them, you speak to them nicely, you make the room beautiful, not all cluttered and noisy, and you know, you make everything possible to be as conducive for that person to be calm. And then you love them and you're kind to them, you smile at them, you tell them what a wonderful mother they've been, what a good wife you've been, what a good job you've done with your life, because we all have guilt. I'm a bad person with so much stress, you know. Is to help the person in every way you can by being a really kind, loving presence. And that immediately makes a person feel more confident and more spacious. Praise, I mean, well, you can't say look forward to another life, obviously, but you praise them, you love them, you say good things about them. We none of us like to think about good things about ourselves. To have someone else tell us we're a good person is like a miracle. This is a very delicious thing to do. I mean, it doesn't follow that they're going to respond to it, but that's the very least. The main point is to be a kind, generous, peaceful presence for the person. And that's why Rinpoche talks in the book, make the room as beautiful as possible. If they're going to be dying slowly, make everything peaceful and kind. That's the trouble with hospitals. I mean, nurses and doctors are so kind, but it's probably the worst way to die, because the crucial point is to make it peaceful. And the best is to choose exactly the space, if they're dying slowly, have beautiful views, have everything in the room lovely, so that we all know that having a peaceful environment can at least help our mind be peaceful. Then the people who are in the room, don't bring the troublemakers in, don't have everybody running around. And if they're in a coma even, don't have the room full of people and noise. Everything should be peaceful and calm and quiet. That helps the mind be calm. And then just be loving and kind to them. That's the most precious thing you can do. Do you understand?
Okay, yes, absolutely.
Or even you could also, even another point, Andrea, and it's not being manipulative. Many people love Tibetan Buddhist music. They just think it's lovely music. They don't think of it as prayers. They think of it as music. Well, you have a person singing, say, Om Mani Padme Hum, really quietly. Just its function is to calm the mind down. And in the Buddhist view, of course, it gives a deep blessing to their mind. It can help virtue be manifesting. So there's many ways you can. It's to help a person be peaceful. And when the mind is peaceful, the virtuous thoughts have the ability to come to the surface. And that's what helps them die well. And that's what helps the karmic seed trigger for a good next life. That's the dog, the bird, or your auntie, same thing. Do you understand?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Good. Fantastic. Who else?
I think I'm next.
Who's I?
Okay.
Wendy, good darling, talk to me.
My father has just been diagnosed with COVID. He's 90, and
My
what
God.
do you do if someone is in a hospital who you can't be with?
This is just too awful for words. This is such a tragedy. And he has to go to hospital, does he?
We're not sure yet. He's 90 years old and he has all these symptoms, but he's trying to get medicine at this point. But if he is, my question is like the materialist, he's done amazing things for the world. So we'll feed him with kindness and what he's done. But and we're only able to be with him on phone or FaceTime or something of that kind. What is the best way to be with somebody who is dying of COVID at this moment, like so many?
Exactly. I think that's similar to what I said to Andrea. First of all, you have to know your daddy's mind. Is he a religious man? What kind of views about the world does he have?
He's a Rooseveltian. He believes in humanity. He's done service his whole life. He's political. He's just done amazing things for the world.
So he's got good ethics, in other words. So that means if he's practiced ethics all his life, Wendy, that tells us that his mind is relatively peaceful. It has to be. And he's very spacious and he's got love and kindness in his heart. So then whether you're next to him or on the FaceTime or on the phone, any opportunity you have, do exactly what I said to Andrea. You help him become, he knows he's old. Is he confronting death, do you think? Is he very practical and down to earth?
Yes, he's very.
And then he knows it. So you just have to be the most loving presence. So of course, being a Buddhist, you can also get the Kopan monastery to the priest to do prayers and pujas. This is another aspect you can do. And I don't think that's cheating anybody if they don't believe in Buddhism. That can still be enormously helpful to help their mind navigate going through the bardo. Same to you, Andrea. You can have prayers and pujas done, not necessarily in front of them, but even with your father, you could just sing a mantra. You could play a mantra to make him peaceful.
I think it'd be better to play Bach for him because.
Okay, then whatever. And then Bach, okay, that'll help him be peaceful. It won't help him much with karmic imprints, that's all. But that's okay, whatever. But the point of the Buddhist ones, and this is where we have to think about, that by just having mantra that connects to the Buddhas, and the Buddhas work at a much powerful, more subtle level, which can help him in his subtle mind. But that you can do those practices on the side. So, but you, in terms of your presence, you be kind, loving, spacious, grateful, praise him, thank him, lift his heart, let him hear positive, uplifting words. You can't get something more precious than that. You understand, darling?
Thank you.
Good, thank you, Wendy. This is so relevant to everybody, I think we should go soon. It's really time to go. One more question. Who is, and then we can discuss this more next week for sure. We can go to more detail. Any more questions?
A question, please unmute yourself.
Okay, maybe we just do a little meditation, then we just watch our minds for a few minutes. We do Mahamudra. Mahamudra is a wonderful book of Lama Yeshe's. It's the two types of meditation, concentration and insight. But the particular function of it, especially is the second part, is to realize the emptiness. But the first part is a concentration technique. But the unique aspect of Mahamudra meditation is the object we focus on isn't the breath, isn't a visualization, but is the actual mind itself. So we do the best we can, you know. We simply just get our bodies comfy, be very natural. Think of it as a very natural activity. Just close your eyes. And with strong determination, what we're going to think is, I'm going to pay attention to whatever pops up in my mind. We don't try to have thoughts. We don't try to work out what the thoughts are. We don't look for thoughts. We don't make them go away. We don't have a conversation with them. You just simply make this decision that that part of your mind called attention is going to observe whatever arises, the rest of your mind, because there's millions of thoughts there. So just with strong determination, in a very relaxed way, but focused, pay attention to your thoughts. Pay attention to what arises in your mind. Just pay attention, keep the mind steady, and let whatever comes, let it come and go. No commentary. And even if you're confused about what you're looking at, don't worry. Just pay attention, stay focused. So relax now. There's about 3 quality minutes, okay? It's such a good one to do, just to, yeah. So, but one more thing I want to say, like for example, for Wendy and other people in Wendy's situation, if it makes sense to you, Wendy, you can also get prayers and practices done. You can email me and I'll tell you, you email Kopan Monastery. And one of the things they do full-time, the monks full-time doing prayers and practices for people. If you have confidence in the presence of Buddhas and enlightened beings, then it's a really marvelous thing to do for your daddy, and to dedicate your darling father or leading such a good life, And then to Wendy, and think it'll be me. That's the big one. That'll be me. Remember, it's going to be you. The really powerful learning comes from that, as we all know. But meanwhile, take care of your darling father. That's all of us, okay? So thank you so much, everybody. Much love. See you next week. And we continue this topic, I think. We'll see how we go.
Thank you, Robina.
Thank you. Just dedicates Jang Chub, Semchog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa, Mepa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Pelba Shol. And then all these seeds we planted, this 2 hours, none go astray. May we nourish these seeds we've planted from listening to these ideas. May we continue to try and understand impermanence, put it into our minds, get to see the reality of it, live it, and then shift the way we live our lives as a result of that. So we can eventually develop all our marvelous potential so we can be a benefit to others. Thank you, everybody. Much love. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robina.
Thank you so much.